Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today is our third psychology lecture. We are going through the chapter number 1, Introduction to Psychology, and today's topic is Role of Psychologists in Various Fields and Branches of Psychology. So, some of the fields in which psychologists are rendering commendable services are given below. Number 1, clinical psychology. Number 2, experimental psychology. Number 3, educational psychology. Number 4, environmental psychology. Number 5, criminal psychology. And number 6, business psychology. Apart from these fields of psychology, there are so many other fields of psychology in which psychologists are uh, providing their services. But according to your course content, we will be discussing only these 6 fields of psychology. So let's begin with the first field of psychology and the role of psychologists in this field, clinical psychology. Okay, what is clinical psychology? Clinical psychology is a branch of psychology that deals with the individual's mental and behavioral disorders. In clinical psychology, we classify different mental disorders according to certain criteria fixed by American Psychological Association. In clinical psychology, we identify the causes of certain abnormal behaviors, and then with the help of those causes, we identify identified causes, we provide services, treatment, or therapies to control or to modify those mental illnesses. So, eligibility after to become a clinical psychologist, after MSc in clinical psychology, one has to have a diploma or PhD in clinical psychology. Okay. In Pakistan, clinical psychologists are successfully treating patients in government and private hospitals as well. MPhil and PhD programs in clinical psychology have been formally launched in different universities of Pakistan like University of Punjab, Government College University Lahore, Quaid-e-Azam University Islamabad, Bahia University Islamabad, and Karachi University. Let's discuss the scope of psychology, scope of clinical psychology. Okay, clinical psychology is concerned with mental disorders, and clinical psychologists inquire into the causes of mental abnormalities. Apart from collecting data about patients, their motives, emotions, inclinations, etc., clinical psychologists are performing the following duties. Number 1, classification of mental illness. Number 2, diagnosis. Number 3, treatment. And number 4, research. So let's discuss the scope in detail. Number 1, classification of mental illnesses. There are so many mental disorders, and the mental disorders are classified according to certain criteria fixed by American Psychological Association. American Psychological Association APA has introduced DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual. We can say that Diagnostic Statistical Manual is an encyclopedia which the clinical psychologists consult. It is a manual which clinical psychologists consult for the diagnosis and treatment of different mental problems. In DSM, there is there's a detailed description of mental illnesses with the criteria, diagnosis, and treatment. It is only after an in-depth study of the classification of mental disorders that clinical psychologists can enter upon the next phase. Currently, DSM-5 is being used, but according to your textbook, in DSM-4, the following divisions of mental disorders are given: anxiety disorder, somatoform disorder, dissociative disorder, personality disorder, mood disorder, adjustment disorder, schizophrenia, and other psychotic disorders. So, first scope of clinical psychology is the classification of mental illnesses, and mental illnesses are classified in DSM, which is a manual of mental illnesses. It is developed by American Psychological Association. In this DSM, different disorders have been classified. In the past, People had various misconceptions about mental illnesses, and they attributed those illnesses to evil spirits or ghosts as well. Mental disorders were considered to be outcome of sins or evil doings as well. Efforts were made to treat them by magic or exorcism, or the patient was subjected to physical torture on the belief that torture would drive out the evil spirit. So all these inhuman concepts prevailed till Renaissance in the 16th century. Humanistic theories gained the power, and they began to lay on treating the mental illnesses in the same way as physical illnesses. In this way, gradually different hospitals and asylums were set up for the cure of mental illnesses. Okay, second scope of clinical psychology is the diagnosis. Having thoroughly studied the disorders, clinical psychologists are able to diagnose a particular illness on the basis of different symptoms. Diagnosis involves a lot of hard work and a lot of labor as well, because the successful treatment depends upon the correct diagnosis. Sometimes the symptoms are so intermixed that we are unable to diagnose the illness, and then if the diagnosis is not properly done, so the treatment will not work. Generally, there are two procedures adopted for diagnosis. Number one, diagnostic or clinical interviews. In diagnostic or clinical interviews, conversation is made with the patients, with the clients, and we determine the condition of that disease. We take case history. A detailed case history involves the description of the previous symptoms, previous record, family history, and so many other major symptoms of the illness. The second method adopted for the diagnosis is the psychological test, the use of psychological tests. These tests facilitate the diagnosis. So, there are two methods of diagnosis: clinical interview or the psychological tests. Number three, treatment. Dear students, you know that it is the duty of the clinical psychologist to diagnose as well as to treat the mental illness. Different methods are used for the treatment. Considering the nature and severity of the disorder, the clinical psychologists prescribe proper treatments. There are so many types of treatment techniques which are used in the psychotherapy of the clients. They include individual treatment, individual psychotherapy, group therapy, psychoanalysis, behavioral therapy, gestalt therapy, humanistic therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, and so on. Apart from these methods, there are various other therapies which take into account the nature of the disorder as well as the patient's circumstances. In some cases, the patient family members are also involved in this treatment, and this is known as family therapy. In Pakistan, clinical psychologists are successfully treating patients in various hospitals. Psychiatry wards have been set up in almost all the government hospitals, and beside this, services of clinical psychologists are also hired to treat prisoners in jails. Different public and private institutions have been set up to treat the drug addicts. Clinical psychologists are also helping out people in the private clinics also. So, number four is research. Research is like the lifeblood in any field. So, research facilitates discovery of new methods of diagnosis and treatment. It is because of research that psychology originating in the Stone Age has now acquired the status of science. This process of research is in the full swing even today, and that is why new theories, therapeutic methods, and psychological tests are being brought out daily for the betterment of people. So, this was clinical psychology and the role of clinical psychologists. Now we come to the next field of psychology, that is educational psychology. What is educational psychology? Educational psychology is a branch of psychology that deals with teacher, student, and the administration. This field covers the entire range of behavior and personality related to education. This branch of psychology deals with teaching and learning. The branch of knowledge that, through the application of methods based on psychological principles, brings about a disciplined change in the behavior of students is the educational psychology. So, the role of educational psychologist is centered around three factors. Number one, objectives. Number two, criteria and content. And number three, methods. Objectives. In education field, you know that the objectives are determined first. Educationists identify general and particular goals for the students and for the teachers as well. There are two types of objectives: general objectives and specific objectives. General objectives relate to the values of the society. Educationists identify particular goals to transfer the thoughts, beliefs, values, and customs of the ancestors to the new generation, and this is the general objective. So, the general objective of educational psychology is imparting or transferring the values and the beliefs of the ancestors to the coming generations. This is the general objective of education. The specific objective of education the is that the individual will undergo what changes will individual undergo after having gone through the syllabus. This is the formal learning. The specific objective of education is the formal learning of students. What is formal learning? Formal learning is the learning which they gain by attending an institution. Is it clear? Okay. The second factor is criterion content. In this, experts determine what can be taught to a child at which age. What are the general criteria for a particular skill? The educational psychologists identify the nature and syllabus of training of every age. That is, when the potential of the child first develops, when he can learn relatively more difficult skills, which topics are more important for a particular age, or which subjects are essential for a society, which subjects are to be taught to the children with a particular talent, and so on. After thorough study and research, the educational psychologists not only formulate rules and regulations about all these issues, but also prescribe syllabus for all the stages. And you know, a committee comprising subject specialists is constituted to determine the syllabus of that subject. Educational psychologists also sit in these committees and they design the syllabus according to the mental level and age level of the students. Number three, method. Okay, educational psychologists not only determine the criteria and content, but also they detail the methods whereby that syllabus is to be taught to the students. The method of examination, the assessment procedures, question papers, semester, annual systems, the educational psychologists design those methods. Apart from this, sub-syllabus and teaching methods are also designed according to the IQ level of the child. So, is it clear? So, what is the role of educational psychologist? They define the general and specific objectives. They fix the criteria and content that according to which age group which skills um, should be made them to learn, and methods they design methods for the better learning and assessment of the students. The next field of psychology is business psychology. Okay, what is business psychology? This is the branch of psychology which provides information about basic factors as doing business and running it, and this is also related to employment and industry. The branch of psychology which is related to employment and industry, it is obvious that no business can be established overnight. We know this. So, what is really important is the careful planning which is made prior to starting any sort of business. For example, which products are in demand in which area, or where raw material can be obtained from, where workers are easily available, what arrangements are in place for carrying manufactured products in the market, which other people or departments can be helpful in running the industry, or how these experts can be hired, and so on. So, all aspects of business and the whole range of human problems related to it come under the scope of business psychology. The next field is experimental psychology. Okay, what is experimental psychology? Experimental psychology is a branch of psychology concerned with the scientific investigation of the responses of individuals to stimulus in controlled conditions. Okay, in experimental psychology, we study the responses of the individuals which they give in certain situations, in certain control situations. Okay, when we present a certain, or we can say that we would check the response of an individual, what is the response of that individual in response to a particular stimulus. Experimental psychologists employ human participants and animal subjects to study a great many topics like sensation, perception, memory, cognition, learning, motivation, illusion, free association, and so on. So, experimental psychologists work, or they check, or they analyze the responses of individual by, in certain controlled conditions, they analyze the sensations, perception, memories, learning, motivation, and so on, these processes in individuals after presentation of certain stimulus. Wilhelm Wundt formally initiated experiments in psychology. In 1879, he set up the first lab at Leipzig in Germany, and he included subjects in experiments after giving them proper training. Okay, initially many experts worked in collaboration with Wundt, but later on some of these psychologists proceeded to their respective countries and established more labs there. Today there is no developed country that does not have labs. In these labs, the individual's mental processes and behaviors are studied. Apart from human behaviors, yeah, human beings and animals, animals are also being the subjects of experimentation. Mouse, cat, dog, monkeys, pigeons, etc. have been favorite subjects of psychologists for so many years. The scope of experimental psychology is vast because it is not a separate branch of psychology. To conduct experiments is just one of the methods of study and research which every branch of psychology is successfully using to deduce ever new results. Okay? So the next field of psychology is environmental psychology. What is environmental psychology? Along with the study of individuals' mental processes and behaviors, his genetic traits, environment holds a great importance in psychology as well. In environmental psychology, the individual is studied with reference to his environment. Without including environment, the study of individual is, we can say that the study of individual is not complete. It looks into how individuals' behavior and mental processes are influenced by his general environment. In environmental psychology, we see that how individual behavior, how his mental processes are being affected by his general environment. Environment, what is the importance? Environment plays an important role in the growth and development of personality. Apart from genetics, environment has a great role. And with reference to growth, environment is divided into two types: the prenatal environment and the postnatal environment. If both of these environments are healthy, helpful, and conducive, it leaves pleasant and healthful effects on our organisms. Otherwise, there is much risk of problems, difficulties, complications, and illnesses. For the study of individuals, some psychologists attach more importance to environment than inheritance. But the fact is, both environment and inheritance or genetics plays equal role in the development of individual. Scope of environmental psychology. The scope of environmental psychology is very vast. Different psychologists want to know how simple light in a room affects workers and their outcome, their output, along with technicians, students, learning process, hospital physicians, and patients. Some psychologists focus their attention on how poisonous pollutants in the environment affect our behavior, whereas some experts are interested in how much and what type of place is required for better output. Other psychologists are interested in the search of effective ways that may bring about a change in individuals' behavior, and so on. Environmental psychology tries to see how external factors, their organization, and other aspects influence human behavior. In this regard, it is noted that how people affect changes in their environment to satisfy their physiological and psychological needs. The analysis of environment can tell us about the level of pollution, smoke, dust, but it cannot tell what the individual thinks about these changes. So, environmental psychology helps us in this regard. Dear students, we can say that the scientific analysis of environment can tell us about the level of different things. The effect of all the factors on human behavior is thoroughly studied in environmental psychology. Apart from individuals, different institutions such as government departments, educational institutes, places of worship, hospitals, and so on are also the subject of environmental psychology. Okay, so the next field is criminal psychology. What is criminal psychology? Criminal psychology is also known as correctional psychology. This branch of psychology conducts the psychological study of the personality and behavior of lawbreakers, criminals, or antisocial elements. It also suggests measures for the correction, rehabilitation, and welfare of those criminals as well. Not only the study of those lawbreakers, but also their correction and rehabilitation comes under criminal psychology. In criminal psychology, or we can say the criminal psychologists work on the correction, rehabilitation, and learning skills, making them learn different skills according to their talents and resources and make them responsible citizens as well. It is also concerned with the verification of evidence given by criminals and recognition of their rights as well. Okay, what is crime? Before going into the classification of criminals, we see that what is crime? Crime is any violation of law. It is the act of an individual which is prohibited by law. Okay. According to law, classification of crimes, we can classify crimes according to law and according to motives. According to law, there are two types of crimes: minor crimes and serious crimes, according to law. And according to motives, there are different crimes like economic crimes, sexual crimes, political crimes, and so many other crimes. Criminal law. What is criminal law? The rules that regulate human behavior and are enforced by political authority. These are criminal law are the rules which regulate human behavior, which modify human behavior, which modify the behavior of antisocial persons and enforced, and this law is enforced by the political authority. These rules apply to all the citizens and their violation is subject to punishment. Okay? There are different types of criminals. Number one, traditional criminals. What are traditional criminals? Traditional criminals are the people of every area. We know that the people of every area have their own culture, traditions, rules, and regulations. Traditional criminal crimes include cattle theft, murder, and quarrel over an irrigation water system or something like that. These are very common in rural feudal system. The incidence of crimes such as pocket picking, fraud, robbery is very high in industrial areas, and these are the traditional criminals which perform these criminal acts. Accidental criminals. An ordinary law abiding citizen unintentionally committing a crime is an accidental criminal. Okay? Violation of traffic rules or a serious accident due to faulty brakes of a car come under this category. So, accidental criminals are the criminals which unintentionally commit a crime. Situational criminals. Okay, what are situational criminals? When a peaceful citizen is reduced to crime by circumstances. Situationally, he becomes a criminal. For example, if a person shoots at a thief or a robber or during a routine quarrel, happens to cause death by hitting some sensitive part of the body. This is the situational criminal. Okay? Situational criminals are those people, those peaceful citizens who are reduced to a crime due to certain circumstance. Professional criminals. Who are professional criminals? Professional criminals are such people who adopt the life of a crime as profession. They charge fee according to the nature of the crime. They demand fees for illegal disposition of land, restoration of possession of land, murder, kidnapping, and so on. So, this was all about criminals, types of criminals. Criminals involved in breakdown of law and order. There is another type. You can say that such people are guilty of disrupting law and order in society. For example, damaging vehicles, staging protest rallies, burning tires, robbing shops, displaying arms, terrorize people, hooliganism, etc. What are psychological criminals? These such criminals break laws because of mental depression, personality disorder, any sort of delusion, or any sort of faulty self image. The major causes of crime, psychological criminals, the major cause is the heredity factor, the geographical factor, or the environmental factor. Psychological and social factors contribute to it. Psychologists recommend correctional measures for the reformation of criminals. Besides, they set up certified schools for the juvenile criminals as well. So, this was all about the role of psychologists in different fields of psychology. I hope the lecture is clear. So, this was our third lecture. The chapter 1 is closed. There were three topics in this chapter. Number 1, meaning and definition of psychology. Number 2, goals of psychology. And number 3, role of psychologist in different fields. So, dear students, I recommend you to listen to the lecture and also follow your textbook as well. If you find any difficulty, you can ask and we will solve the queries. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.